How certain are you that what you call faith is not merely familiarity wearing the mask of devotion? When did obedience quietly become comfort and conviction slowly dissolve into routine without sounding an alarm inside your soul? Ask yourself this with brutal honesty. If faith never unsettles you, never disrupts your sense of control, never threatens the structures you rely on, can it still be called faith at all? There is a blindness that does not come from darkness, but from too much light. A light so constant, so normalized, that it numbs the eyes until they can no longer distinguish truth from habit. And this blindness does not announce itself as rebellion. It arrives disguised as loyalty, as reverence, as faithfulness itself. What if the greatest danger to Christianity was never doubt, never persecution, never open rejection, but certainty without obedience? What if the words repeated week after week, the prayers spoken with ease, and the beliefs defended with passion have slowly detached from the living call they once answered? There is a way of believing that asks nothing of you, costs nothing, risks nothing, and yet convinces you that you are standing firmly on holy ground. This is not a loss of faith, but something far more deceptive. Faith that feels complete while being profoundly empty. A condition where the conscience sleeps peacefully, unaware that it has been gently silenced. There are truths that do not disappear when ignored. They wait. They linger beneath polished language and moral confidence, watching as devotion becomes performance and grace becomes permission. Somewhere along the way, following Christ stopped being a path that narrowed and became a wide road paved with reassurance. The most dangerous lies are never loud. They whisper. They affirm. They tell you that you are already where you need to be, that nothing more is required, that obedience can be postponed without consequence. And the longer this whisper is trusted, the harder it becomes to recognize the voice that once called you to deny yourself and walk into uncertainty. This is the blindness that feels like clarity, the illusion that convinces sincere believers they are awake, while something essential inside them has fallen asleep. It does not attack faith, it replaces it. It does not demand denial, it offers comfort. And by the time it is recognized, it has already reshaped what obedience means, what grace costs, and what it truly means to follow. There is a warning hidden in this tension, one that was seen long before it became normal, one that exposes the quiet distance between believing in Christ and actually following him. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it, because every step before that moment suddenly demands to be re-examined. There is a stage in the life of faith that feels like arrival, and that is precisely why it is so dangerous. It does not announce itself with rebellion, crisis, or doubt, but with relief. A quiet sense that the struggle is over, that the tension has been resolved, that the questions which once disturbed the soul are no longer necessary. Faith begins to feel settled, organized, manageable. What once felt like standing exposed before a living and demanding presence now feels like standing on familiar ground, surrounded by certainty. The soul stops leaning forward. It stops listening for interruption. Obedience subtly shifts from being a response to a voice into being a concept already understood, and nothing seems wrong. Life continues, belief remains intact, devotion appears stable. Yet beneath this calm, something vital begins to thin. Not visibly, not dramatically, but slowly, like breath held just long enough to forget what it feels like to inhale deeply. This is not the loss of faith. It is faith that has stopped trembling. Blindness does not grow in darkness alone. It often grows in light that no longer challenges the eyes. In words heard so often they lose their weight, in truths repeated without risk, in prayers spoken without expectation of interruption. Scripture becomes familiar territory instead of dangerous ground. Prayer becomes structure instead of encounter. The soul learns to move within faith without being moved by it. And because everything looks correct, no alarm is triggered. The conscience adapts. It learns which questions lead to discomfort and quietly avoids them, not out of defiance, but out of efficiency. The language of devotion remains refined, convincing, even passionate. But the posture has changed. Faith is no longer something lived in tension. It is something defended with confidence. And this confidence feels like strength. It feels like maturity. It feels like clarity. If you realize that this clarity is often the first symptom of a soul that no longer expects to be called beyond itself, what if the greatest threat to faith is not disbelief, but completion? Not rejection, but the assumption that nothing more is required. Blindness feels holy precisely because it removes inner conflict. It allows belief to exist without surrender, identity without obedience, assurance without transformation. It does not deny truth, it domesticates it. It does not attack obedience, it delays it. It whispers that the call has already been answered, that the cost has already been paid, that faith may now rest without response. And once this whisper settles in, the soul stops asking the questions that unsettle comfort and lead to life. Not because those questions were answered, but because they became dangerous. Somewhere beneath this calm, obedience remains, waiting, while faith quietly convinces itself that it has already arrived. There is a quiet shift that happens when faith becomes something you carry rather than something that carries you. It begins when belief starts orbiting around the self instead of pulling the self into orbit around Christ. The language remains the same, the symbols remain intact, the rituals continue uninterrupted, yet the center has moved. Faith slowly adapts to the shape of life rather than reshaping life itself. It becomes compatible, reasonable, efficient. It no longer interrupts ambition, no longer threatens stability, no longer questions the structures that provide safety and identity. And this adaptation feels like wisdom. It feels like balance. It feels like learning how to live faithfully in the world. But beneath that balance, something fractures. Following becomes agreement, devotion becomes affirmation, discipleship becomes something internal, invisible, untestable. And when faith can no longer be tested, it can no longer be trusted. This is where the soul learns a dangerous skill. How to feel faithful without being obedient, how to believe deeply without responding fully, how to speak about sacrifice while protecting comfort. There is no conscious decision to compromise, no moment of betrayal, only a gradual reinterpretation of what obedience means. The demands of the gospel are softened, reframed, explained away as symbolic or contextual or already fulfilled. The cross becomes an idea rather than a collision. Grace becomes permission rather than power, and the conscience, relieved of its former weight, settles into a manageable peace. This peace feels spiritual, it feels earned, it feels like freedom, but it is often nothing more than the absence of resistance, the quiet relief of no longer being pressed beyond what feels safe. Bonhoeffer understood that this was not weakness, but danger, not because faith disappears, but because it survives by surrendering its substance. When belief no longer risks anything real, it no longer transforms anything real. The soul begins to protect itself using spiritual language, shielding desire, fear, and control behind respectable devotion. Faith becomes a possession instead of a path, something owned rather than something walked. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the call of Christ fades into background noise, still present, still audible, but no longer decisive. The tragedy is not that believers stop hearing the call. It is that they learn how to hear it without moving. There is a particular kind of silence that settles in when faith no longer expects disruption. It is not the silence of absence, but the silence of familiarity, when the voice that once unsettled the soul becomes predictable, interpretable, safe. The call of Christ is still heard, but it is filtered through habit, tradition, and personal limits. Nothing unexpected is allowed to pass through. Obedience is pre-negotiated. The soul decides in advance how far it is willing to go, what it is willing to lose, what it is willing to surrender. and anything beyond that boundary is quietly reclassified as metaphor, context, or extremism. This is how control survives inside faith, not by rejecting the call, but by redefining it until it fits comfortably inside a life that no longer wants to be interrupted. At this stage, the inner tension that once marked genuine discipleship begins to feel unnecessary, even unhealthy. Discomfort is mistaken for imbalance. Conviction is treated as excess. The soul seeks harmony, alignment, peace, but not the peace that comes through surrender. It seeks the peace that comes from resolution, from explanation, from being finished with the struggle. And so faith becomes increasingly inward, increasingly private, increasingly detached from action. It lives safely in thoughts and intentions, untouched by consequence. This inward turn feels sincere. It feels deep. But depth without movement slowly becomes stagnation. The water appears calm, reflective, pure, yet nothing flows. And where nothing flows, life quietly thins. Bonhoeffer saw that this is where faith becomes most vulnerable, not to attack, but to erosion. When obedience is no longer concrete, it becomes optional. When it is optional, it becomes rare. And when it becomes rare, belief compensates by becoming louder, more confident, more certain. The soul defends what it no longer lives. It speaks boldly about truths it no longer risks embodying. And all the while, a quiet fracture grows between what is believed and what is followed. This fracture is rarely acknowledged, because acknowledging it would require a choice, and choice would require loss. So instead, faith learns to coexist with distance, calling it maturity, calling it balance, calling it wisdom. And blindness deepens, not because light is absent, but because the soul has decided what it will no longer allow that light to reveal. There comes a moment when the soul senses that something is missing, but cannot name it without unraveling everything it has carefully built. It feels like standing in a room filled with light and still knowing that something essential remains unseen. Faith continues, devotion remains sincere, yet a quiet dissonance hums beneath the surface. The believer senses distance, not from belief, but from life itself, from movement, from risk, from the sharp edge of following that once made faith feel dangerous and alive. This awareness rarely arrives as accusation. It comes as fatigue, as a subtle heaviness, as the feeling that something meant to matter deeply has become strangely weightless. And instead of leaning into that unease, the soul often learns to manage it, to spiritualize it, reinterpret it, silence it, because allowing it to speak would demand a reckoning. This is where blindness reveals its most convincing illusion, the belief that stillness is faithfulness, that maintaining what exists is the same as obeying what is called. The soul clings to order, to continuity, to a version of faith that does not require disruption. Obedience becomes theoretical. Surrender becomes symbolic. Sacrifice becomes something admired rather than practiced. And the more this pattern solidifies, the harder it becomes to imagine faith any other way. The cost of obedience feels excessive. The call feels unreasonable. The idea of real following feels distant, even irresponsible. Yet beneath these justifications, a quiet truth remains unresolved. Faith was never meant to preserve the self. It was meant to reorient it. And anything that leaves the self intact while claiming allegiance to Christ carries a tension that cannot be erased, only postponed. Bonhoeffer understood that this postponement is where faith slowly loses its power, not because it is denied, but because it is delayed indefinitely. Tomorrow becomes the safest place for obedience. Someday becomes the refuge of conviction, and the present moment, the only place where following can actually occur, remains untouched. The soul learns to admire obedience without practicing it, to honor sacrifice without embracing it, to speak of surrender while remaining firmly in control. This condition feels sustainable. It feels reasonable. It feels spiritually mature. but it carries a quiet cost, the gradual dulling of perception, the inability to recognize when faith has become habit, when belief has replaced trust, when certainty has displaced courage. And once this dulling takes hold, the soul does not rebel. It settles, waiting, preserving, deferring, unaware that the very stillness it protects may be the thing that keeps it from ever truly following. What remains after the questions have been asked is not clarity but awareness, the kind that lingers like a quiet vibration beneath the surface of ordinary life. Faith, once examined, no longer feels like something owned, but something that watches back. The familiar symbols now carry weight again, not because they were explained, but because they were allowed to disturb. And in that disturbance, something subtle awakens. The recognition that following was never meant to feel finished, that the unease you feel is not a failure of belief, but the evidence of life returning to places that had grown still. Like a door left slightly open, the soul senses movement beyond what it can fully see, and that awareness refuses to be silenced. There is a difference between peace that numbs and peace that clarifies. One settles the soul into sleep, the other sharpens it into presence. The journey you have just walked does not offer answers that can be stored away. It leaves you with a posture, a way of standing before truth without rushing to control it. Faith, seen this way, becomes less about certainty and more about courage, less about protection and more about response. And perhaps that is why the echo remains, because something within you recognizes that the cost you once feared may be the very thing that restores meaning to belief. The call has not grown louder. You have simply grown quiet enough to hear it again. Some truths do not demand immediate action. They demand honesty. They wait patiently for the moment when comfort no longer satisfies, when repetition no longer convinces, when belief without movement feels incomplete. If something within you feels unsettled, do not rush to resolve it. That tension is not your enemy. It is the space where transformation begins. Like a seed buried in silence, it does not announce its growth. It simply works. And long after the words fade, that seed continues its quiet labor, reshaping how you see obedience, courage, and what it truly means to follow. If this stirred something you cannot yet name, stay with it. Let it deepen. Let it question you again tomorrow and the day after that. And if you sense that this journey is one you do not want to walk alone, take the next step naturally. Like this video, not as approval, but as recognition. Share it with someone who may be standing in the same quiet tension. Leave a comment, not to explain, but to testify to what resonated. And if you feel drawn to continue exploring these deeper currents of faith, subscribe, not to consume content, but to remain awake. Because some truths do not end when a video does. They begin there,